God help us that this is, the last place that I'm aware of where you can just go and succeed on the basis of intellectual merit. One of the things I hear from young men all around the country, all around the whole Western world actually, is that the system seems to be against you. And I think that's because the system is against you. Broadly speaking, if you look at the statistics, you look at the anecdotes, a lot of young, competent, intelligent men have been locked out of the public institutions by various schemes. I mean, we've all seen this discussed over the last few years, especially. And I wanted to discuss today what your actual options are and what we can do about that. What are the ways that people have actually gotten out of the ghetto, so to speak, that the system has been trying to put us in? And so I brought on my colleague Ben Landau-Taylor here. We're going to discuss the one way out that I've seen, which is the San Francisco intellectual scene. Now, this isn't necessarily the only way out, the only way sort of to find esteem and a merit-based place in the world. But it is certainly one, and it is one that we've seen a lot up close. So we're here in San Francisco. People often sort of ask, why would you be in San Francisco, famously one of the most progressive cities in America? Well, San Francisco is actually not just a monoculture. It's actually quite diverse intellectually, and that's why it's interesting. And that's why, and furthermore, it's very meritocratic. And that's why it's actually a really good place to be. So Ben, let's start with having you introduce yourself, and then let's get into this topic.
So I've been, here in the Bay Area for, I guess, 13 years now, and I came here initially, there was I visited for like a week and was just immediately struck by these are my people, these are, the scene here is just filled with people who are thinking about the sorts of things that I think are important, who are, actually trying to find answers in ways that I really resonated with. So I was just immediately came over here. I was kind of like, all right, we'll figure out what that actually means. But I could tell that this, the culture here was what I wanted to be part of. And,
right.
I've followed been part of a bunch of, interesting, in my eyes, very fruitful intellectual projects in my time here, which, doing types of sort of basic research, just, every now and then I'll get, some young man is asking me for career advice. It's like, it seems like you've been, I'm here in the academy writing about a bunch of stuff that I don't care about to give to people who will never read it. And I see you are writing about the fundamental questions which, you seem to really care about, and just doing the research about the things that matters to you, and how do I get there? And a lot of that has been through, when I first came here as part of Leverage Research was where we first got to know each other. It was primarily a psychology research group. I was doing mostly sociology research, sort of studying the structure of society there. After that was part of Bismarck Analysis, doing a lot of case study work, a lot of institutional analysis. That was the consulting firm which our friend Samo put together to just be doing a lot of taking a lot of this sort of social theory, applying it to particular cases. Now I'm here doing the students, and it's just a bunch of sort of oddball intellectual projects that I don't think could have started anywhere but here.
Yeah, and I think from the outside, this all looks very weird, and it all looks very, questionable in a variety of ways. And I'm sure the audience can fill in their own ways that we all seem like a bunch of wackos, which we probably are.
We certainly are in many ways.
This is very much a city of wackos, but that's why it works.
Right.
And so I remember, a few years ago, I went and drove my Volkswagen van all around the continent with my family, and we visited a whole lot of people. And I remember having one conversation with a relation, let's say, where he's a philosopher academically, works in academia, does philosophy research, that sort of thing, and he had recently been inspired to kind of do some more work philosophically on his PhD topics and so on. But he seemed very intrigued by the fact that a bunch of us unregulated philosophers, let's say, out here in San Francisco, are able to not only kind of do much more, maybe less rigorous sometimes, but much more wide-ranging, and in many ways more lucrative philosophy than you can do anywhere near the academia. And so I thought that was like an interesting data point, right? It's like, okay, there is this thing that people don't necessarily understand, but they see it, and or maybe they haven't seen it yet. But it's this very important thing to understand, which is that there is a meritocratic intellectual scene in San Francisco that gets people hooked up to, now they're friends with billionaires, now they have a job at the AI research company, now they have whatever, tech connections. People find all kinds of opportunity through this.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of people find that kind of opportunity. And I think, so this is, there's a lot of discourse online about how meritocracy has broadly collapsed, which it has. You look back, I watched The Right Stuff, that movie about the test pilots, Chuck Yeager and John Glenn and the Mercury program that shows kind of in a somewhat caricatured way, a somewhat stylized way, what America was like in the 50s and 60s with respect to like merit and institutions. It was just like they were finding anybody who could do the job, and they were getting a lot of young guys, guys with a lot of edge to them and so on, and they were putting them in important jobs and getting them to do these things like be astronauts or test pilots. And we saw this culminate obviously in the Apollo program. You see a bunch of 26-year-old engineers kind of putting a man on the moon. The sort of height of meritocracy, right? And that was a wonderful way that things were set up. I think a few years later, America decided that that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted more questionable things like feeding the masses and tearing down civilization for various historical reasons. But so these days, I think one of the big casualties of that has been meritocracy, right? And there's a lot of discussion about this. People think, okay, why is it that like a young guy with maybe perfect SAT scores, maybe like high IQ, but like doesn't play well in school, but actually is really capable? There's all these ways that there's people who are objectively capable of a lot, intellectually or in terms of work, but they feel isolated. They feel shut out from the system in various ways, and I think this is dismissed a lot by the people who are in the system. They think, oh well, I got in here through whatever means, and so it must not be happening. But I think it is happening. There are a lot of people who are shut out. We've reported on this with Palladium, the competency crisis article that went around a few years ago. More recently, there was that one in Compact about, in publishing in particular, a very intellectual pursuit, how basically there was like no white men, or straight white men specifically, in publishing in the last 20 years, like new authors. And so that's, there's all these ways that the meritocracy has been dismantled. So if we are aligned with meritocracy, this is something that would be good for us. Where do we find that in the world? Where can we get ahead on the basis of intellectual merit, on the basis of hard work? And San Francisco seems to be one of the remaining places that are like that. And I think a lot of people end up here because of that.
Right, and because it's not systematized, because it's not bureaucratized, because it's not...
Yeah, there's no bureaucracy to capture.
Right.
It's just relationships.
Yeah, there's no one being like, oh man, like, we've gone through the 7 bloggers and like there's, we don't like the demographics of them. It's just, there's a bunch of blogs and people read the ones that they like.
Yeah, what it is there's a concentration of intelligent people who appreciate intelligent people and appreciate insights, and they appreciate, the cutting edge things in the world, and they're all concentrated in this city. And so if you come here, or even if you don't come here, if you write well on the internet, if you have a lot of insight, if you're able to shed light on things, people will respect you for that. And so it's like, I think it's only in San Francisco, at least it was for a long time, where a thinker like Curtis Yarvin could be well respected, right? He brings a lot of insight to the table. He was politically very off limits for a long time. Nonetheless, he's moving around in San Francisco circles and doing quite well, simply on the basis of this guy is actually intelligent and offering useful insight.
Yeah,
and so if you can do that, you can make it.
Yeah, he was correct about things that other people were not correct about, and
that's what wins you cred here.
Yes, like this is, as far as I can tell, uniquely within the US, a sort of leading city where prestige goes just for being right about things with no further qualifiers. Like,
right.
You know, in Boston, if you are right about things and also have an academic pedigree behind them, then like you're in.
Right.
And here, if you have the academic pedigree, if you don't, that's not really what people are checking for.
Yeah, I mean, which isn't to say, you know, people from top schools, you will find a lot of people from top schools, they are objectively very capable sometimes.
For sure.
But yeah, I really don't get the sense that a lot of people care deeply about it. And certainly not a lot of gatekeeping in the broader intellectual scene.
Right. When I first showed up here, for example, like, there were a bunch of people who I would meet. I was, at the time, I was quite deep in the less wrong social space, and I would meet a bunch of people.
I think that's how both of us got here,
right.
Actually.
And, you know, they'd be like, oh, yes, like, I liked the comments you were leaving on the blog posts, and so I would get invited to the parties on that basis. Like, that was what it took.
Right. And those are the parties where many of the other attendees of the parties, you know, many of the people in those scenes have gone on to make enormous amounts of money and enormous amounts of power in artificial intelligence or tech or whatever it is. Like this, it's not like, oh, you know, there's other people to talk to. Like, yeah, that's great. We like other people to talk to, especially if we're, you know, very intellectually focused. We want to talk to other people who have insights and are capable of appreciating insights. But it's not just that. It's insight, and then there's conversion into wealth and power, right, to a large degree, which is like, you should never dangle that too much because people should not expect that to come easy. It never does come easy. It's not easy at all. It's very difficult, but there is a concentration of opportunity and appreciation for insight that's in a very meritocratic way. Right. And I think that's an amazing thing that I think more people should know about. And I hope that it retains this character. I think because it's very much not systematized, like we were saying, that's one of the reasons it has maintained that character. It's this Wild West, many different cults, many different scenes, many different industries, all competing on the basis of, you know, who's going to actually, you know, achieve the big effect in the world, basically.
Right, and like some of the each of the individual communities that are a part of it, you know, each has their own flaws, each has their own particular focuses.
Nonsense, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, some of the, you know, they have their own little, you know, critiques of each other. I think these guys are missing that stuff. I think you know, these people are, you know, they tend to focus too much on this.
Those guys are evil. I remember someone called me evil one time as a profoundly evil person. I don't know. But so I'm probably not welcome in all of these scenes. That's okay. I have my circle of friends. I have my opportunities.
Yeah,
right?
You know, there are some people who are very big over there who I'm like, I don't want to invite you to my house.
You're not coming.
So I won't, and you can have fun with your friends. That's
exactly.
Fine.
There's a lot of people who are not welcome in my parties.
Like it's this big, you know, it ends up being made up out of. So the way I think about it, you know, I kind of think of it. There's like one scene made out of many communities, which is and many cliques.
Yeah, which is what a city is at its best, right?
Yes.
A city is supposed to be this place where you have all the dynamic people, all the dynamic economic and intellectual and cultural activity that's happening in some country, let's say. I mean, country has other connotations, but just some area of influence of that city, right? It all comes to the city and, you know, gets stirred up and there's all these connections made, all this opportunity. And, you know, San Francisco is really working as a city, I think is the punchline here. And yeah, and I think like among the circles that we have online who maybe aren't as aware of this, I think like this is, there's this big counterintuitive thing, which is what I was describing earlier about like San Francisco is known to be this like terribly governed, communist place where they tax billionaires and like.
Yes, it was the best of times. It was the worst of
Right,
times.
exactly. and like everyone's on this monoculture of diversity and inclusion and progressive politics, which was the case in like the mid 2010s. But even then, like I came down here. Let's see. I'll tell my story a little bit. So in 2011, I discovered lesswrong.com. A common
That's how they get you.
A common gateway drug is this intellectual stuff produced by Eliezer Yudkowsky, which has a lot of flaws and has a lot of merits. And I got really into that. It was very interesting to kind of engage in philosophy in this very technical way, this very aggressive way, very ambitious way that they had. I really liked it. And so I chewed through all that. I made a name for myself posting online in those circles. And then, I got wrapped up in other circles, basically the work of Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin. And then I came down to San Francisco for, I was really into computer science at the time. I was searching around for things involving the Y Combinator. You may have heard of it. It's an obscure computer science concept involving functions. But I found this guy named Paul Graham, and I was like, hey, this guy's kind of cool, And so I ended up coming down to San Francisco for some Y Combinator event, which Y Combinator is also the startup accelerator in San Francisco. So I came down for that, and then like on that meeting, someone who knew me from my online writings was like, hey, you can stay at my place, and I'll introduce you to Curtis Yarvin, right? And it's just like, boom, just right off the bat, I'm in.
Right.
And I think it might have been the same meeting, someone had introduced me also to Jeff Anders, the founder of Leverage Research that we later ended up working at. And again, he was just looking for people who were intelligent, ambitious, and had, let's say, independent views on the world. And so, I got introduced to him. And so I, very, very quickly, I'm getting like hooked up into all these scenes of I think, quite interesting things. Some other people might disagree. I found this all to be incredibly interesting. And that's just, I'm not from San Francisco. I'm not even, who am I? I'm just some guy, right? But right. I wrote on the internet in the right scenes. I was interested in the right things, and I was able to bring some insight to the table. And so, boom, I'm in, right? And so that was 2014 or so. And then, even then, I remember Balaji Srinivasan up on stage at the YC event talking about like Silicon Valley's ultimate exit was the name of the talk. You can probably find it on YouTube or somewhere. And he basically like Silicon Valley needs aircraft carriers or something equivalent to kind of secede from the East Coast monoculture. And like this was just sort of what was kind of going on in San Francisco. Like people were just thinking like, we don't like those fuddy-duddy progressives over on the East Coast. And so and then I think I went back the next year though, and every single talk was about diversity. and so clearly there had been a bit of a changing of the guard. Most notably, I think the year before, Paul Graham had been in charge of Y Combinator. The year after, it was Sam Altman. That's probably most proximally explaining that particular thing. But I think broadly speaking, there was a big push to kind of narrative containment on what was happening in San Francisco. And so San Francisco kind of regained its reputation as a very monocultural, leftist kind of progressive place.
A lot of the outward-facing stuff definitely was, but also there was just these little scenes doing their own inquiry in their own particular direction.
But they're quiet.
They
right?
were they got quiet.
They don't have the we especially got quiet around those days because people were getting nailed by journalists and so on. But the
work didn't stop.
The work didn't stop, and the scenes didn't stop, and people were still finding each other, and so it's just that there's this. San Francisco has been, despite the kind of, let's say, entrenched mainstream politics, has been this very politically diverse and interesting place intellectually, and a place where people can come on the basis of these like cutting edge, taboo, insightful lines of inquiry can like get wrapped up into money and power simply on the basis of doing well at that, simply on the basis of insight. And so, you know, this is, I think, a great thing. This is obviously me giving my pitch for why I'm in San Francisco. It's very much a city on the cutting edge of history. Not the only one, I think, but it's
the one that we know best.
It's the one that we know best. And I think it's possibly the most like that in America. You know,
Yes.
I think it's overtaken, you know, New York City in that sense.
Yeah, when it comes to for like where is the intellectual work happening? You know, there are other important things in the world. There are other big sources of upstream power, but when it comes to the intellectual production, I think this is the first city,
especially in America,
which is kind of a horrifying thought, but I think it's true.
Yeah, I know it is horrifying. It's like, okay, you were saying earlier, like the intellectual production in the West no longer happens in academia. It happens in San Francisco, you know, in these like weird intellectual scenes. And like, God help us if that's actually our situation.
But I think it is.
Because, you know, we're a bunch of wackos from the internet, right? I mean, we clearly have a lot of work to do in terms of building up our machine, intellectual machine. But yeah, I guess like this is, I think it's a very important topic. So I'm glad you brought it up. And yeah, that's my story. You know, I ended up founding Palladium, obviously coming out of those scenes, and in 2018, and you know, had been at Leverage Research in the meantime, and have generally gotten hooked up to a lot of very interesting people and a lot of interesting opportunity. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that as we go forward. And so, yeah, the main like big takeaway for like the sensitive young man in like God knows where America with, you know, great intelligence and great ambition, but doesn't know quite sort of how to get up in through the institutions, or they're just not going to allow that anymore. Come to San Francisco, right online. I'm curious how you would put it. Like, what's the recipe, right, for these young guys?
So I think that there's two big things, as you were saying, right online. Is a really big one. That's the way that people, you know, can know that your stuff is actually good. That's the way that you can know your stuff is actually good.
To display honesty and insight, right? It's like,
yes, which is, it's not an easy thing to do. And like when I started doing that, like I got a lot of my stuff torn apart, and I was like, oh yes, like you're right and I'm wrong. And
yeah, I remember getting totally trashed on Less Wrong. You know, my first few essays, it was bloodbath. But and I look back and I'm like, wow, that guy, he's not me. That's an idiot. You know? Right. But nonetheless, I managed to make a name for myself to some degree.
Yeah, like you have to actually, get into the sort of discourse that is going to tear you apart where you're wrong, and you have to, there's a process. No one is springs fully formed from the head of Zeus with a bunch of brilliant insights that all the San Franciscans are going to be like, that's the genius. But like, it takes a lot of work to get actually good. But, one, you want to start so that you start getting good. And then once you have your stuff that's good, you put it online where people can read it. Mm-hmm. And, and there's all this stuff of like, how do I market it? Where do I put it so people can read it? And like, yeah, you've got to think about that.
They'll find it. They'll find it.
It's a solvable problem. It's not trivial, but like if your stuff is actually good, then it'll work out.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can always publish in Palladium, right?
I think there's a lot of good people have, that was the first place that they published. And then from there, they, started getting published more places because they could go and be like, that's not the only way in, but it's a really good one.
Yeah, less wrong.
Just put it on your Substack, put it on the comments on other people's blog posts. Like, talk to the people who are doing the stuff you care about. Do good work. Do it where they can see it. Start getting in dialogue with them. And, there's all of these online scenes, but a lot of the online scenes are sort of the mirror image reflections of in-person scenes. And like I've gotten to the point where I can see
it's largely in person, right?
Yeah, like even I can see when I'm like looking at some like Twitter discourse, I can be like, oh, these guys probably all know each other. I click through and all of them have location Washington D.C. I'm like, okay, yes, I see what's going on here.
And in some cases, they actually are just scattered all around the Western world. And that's I see certain online subcultures, especially ones that think a lot about the problems of the lack of meritocracy and so on. I see some of those online subcultures are disproportionately quite scattered, and this is our sort of
This is the mecca of it.
yeah. Well, this is what we can offer to them, right? It's like put the image of San Francisco aside and try to get in on the intellectual scene here.
Yes, and once you have a little bit gotten into the intellectual scene, you don't need to be some grandmaster, but once you've got like a few friends and someone like, the guy you ran into who was like, oh yeah, you can crash with me.
Yeah.
Like once you've got a few people who, respect you and are, doing good work and are there, then that is a good time to like visit the city for a week or two and just try to meet a bunch of people. Maybe you're friends with a few people in one clique and they can take you around to some parties.
Yeah, I mean, for the record, I'm happy to host people who are like, make a good impression on me online, which I'm not going to reveal how that happens, but
it happens.
I like insight, I like honesty, I like cutting edge thought.
And a lot of people here, the sort of, oh, this guy is like visiting San Francisco for the first time and meeting everyone. This is sort of a known type.
Yeah. No, it's like, okay, yeah, you can stay in my guest room. We'll show you around, right?
Yeah. And then that's a great way to just, break into the scene a bit, go from it's quite hard to go from one clique to another clique just through the online, but it's often quite smooth in person when you're just, you meet a guy, you talk to him for 45 minutes, and then like, you go and read his stuff and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that actually holds up better than I was thinking when we were talking.
Actually, I mean, we did this a couple times this year already. I mean, in January, we held a little conference.
Yes, that was fun.
I don't think we need to give too much of the details on that, but it was a great conference. But it was actually prompted because someone that I respect from online had the opportunity to come through town. So he came to town and I was like, all right, if he's going to be in town, we gotta do something. We gotta throw a party because I like this guy. I like his work. And so I just gathered up, as many of the intelligent people as I could from around our network, even people outside the city, brought them in. We had our little one-day conference. A lot of energy came out of that. It was a lot of fun.
Yes.
I hope he sort of got some good connections out of it. I think a lot of people did out of that little event. And then, what was it, like a month or two later, Nick Land texted me that he was going to be in town. And, of course, I'm a big fan.
Yes.
For many years. But he texted me he was going to be in town. And so we started hanging out, I was like, all right, well, we've got to throw a party, right? And we've got to Nick Land had many connections, obviously, to get hooked up in the city. He had a great time from what I heard at our event.
I had fun.
Yeah, but yeah, we threw this Nick Land acknowledgement, which was our way of introducing Nick to the city. And, 150 people just like beating down the doors, coming out of the woodwork with like 2 days notice.
Yeah.
To see this guy who's, an online, I mean, he's very famous. He's very famous. But a lot of what he's famous for, especially in this city, is very unregulated work, right? It's not operating through any kind of institutions. He did operate through the institutions back in the day, and he's known somewhat for that work. But really, the work that I think he's really well known for is Xenosystems, right? Which is just, okay, he's a really smart guy and he wrote a blog. I mean, that understates it entirely, but he wrote a blog. And I think there will be less spectacular results with your average kind of 22-year-old insightful blogger. But nonetheless, like, what do we got? We've got various people in our networks here who get hooked up on internships and jobs and places to stay and so on, simply on the basis of their Substack.
Right, and I think the thing that, at least for me, was much more compelling than that was a community of people who like cared about the real work.
Yeah.
And, certainly on my own path here, I've made a lot less money than I could have made if I were like going into, finance or like aiming at money. But I could have gotten a job in the university that would probably have been much more stable, but then I would have had to be publishing a bunch of things that I didn't really care about. And here, like, it is a bunch of people who just want the real stuff and they're doing the real stuff. And like, people have their own different takes on like, oh, this is what I care about, this is the field that I'm into, but like people who are just doing the work because it's what they think is the important work.
Yeah, and I'll note about the money. Yeah, it would be nice if some of us could afford houses one of these days, but I will also say that sacrifice of kind of just putting the intellect first and getting in with the right scenes. There are a lot of wealthy people in these scenes who want to see people who do that have some kind of success. And the doors will be opened. There will be things, there will be opportunities. Like it's very stochastic, it's very unreliable. It's not something that you can count on, but it's not like you're totally on your own.
Yeah, there's a lot of software money, and a substantial minority of the software people have actually good intellectual taste and want to support this work. And
yeah,
there's a million and one different ways that happens, and it takes legwork, but it can be done.
And now maybe again we shouldn't dangle the rewards because I think anyone looking for those rewards is going to be sorely disappointed, and they're going to wreck the scene. So
and also
don't
like
think about
it's
it
just,
that way.
Yeah, and also it's just not actually there are if that's the main thing.
If what you want is money, there are much better places to be. Yeah, exactly.
This is like, oh yeah, you can like manage to.
You might survive though.
Yeah, like you can support yourself while you do the real work. You're not going to get rich doing it.
Yeah, you might survive. I mean, hey, some people do get rich doing it, but it's unreliable. Yeah, I mean that's been a great overview on the nature of the scene and the fact that it exists, and that like someone who's actually intellectual and ambitious should just try themselves on coming and hanging out, writing interesting stuff online. We'll hook you up. If you come to town, we'll hook you up, right?
Yes.
And
if your stuff is good.
If your stuff is good, exactly. But I want also maybe to broaden our scope a little bit here to like, okay, this is all happening on a backdrop of the collapse of meritocracy in the Western world. And, that's a very bad situation. And, to some extent, I feel a little bit guilty about shining a spotlight on the last remaining bit of meritocracy in the world, because
I don't think
you start to wonder whether it will be targeted for destruction, right, by the same forces that went after the other ones. And so what I want to also kind of bring our minds to here and have a little discussion about is, okay, we know what at least somewhat of a good meritocratic scene looks like. How do we make it bigger? How do we make this? How do we export the model, right? Like, how do we make more of the Western world more like this? Because what we want, obviously, is like the golden age of academia, which may not have ever happened, but where like intelligent guys from anywhere can offer insight on topics and get hooked up into institutions of merit through that basis. Like, Nietzsche became chair of philology at 24 or something.
Einstein very famously was just a patent clerk was just sending out his theories to the leading physicists, and they were like, wait a minute, this is good.
Yeah, or Newton, like just a little longer ago, but the smart young guy, someone notices him, he gets into the intellectual scenes, and boom, gravity, right? Calculus. So how do we bring that back as, I hate the term bring it back, but how do we cultivate more meritocracy, more intellectual meritocracy in our civilization? Because I think we're very thin on it right now. I think God help us that this is the last place that I'm aware of where you can just go and succeed on the basis of intellectual merit. But surely we can do better than this.
I don't know, like from our position, I don't really know what we would do other than.
Well, let's put on our Napoleon hats and just imagine, like, how could we, or someone who's more powerful maybe, like, help this?
So we've seen a little bit of this happening of, one of the really cool things about being right about stuff is that people can tell. and people want that. And it may not be the only thing that people want, but like, there has been no shortage of like, people who have came here and showed that that they are in fact right about important things, then being, using that as a jumping off point to go into like, East Coast finance or Washington, D.C. or things like that. Mm-hmm. So like if you have a meritocratic source of, source of merit, then that can be, you can turn up the degree to which the other institutions and the other power centers are leaning on that rather than the like, you have...
But that requires at some level like a systematization or scaling of the thing, which is of course what killed it last time, right? Like it was the systematization of academia, it was the scaling of academia that turned it into this institution of spoils distribution.
I think more the scaling than the systematization, actually. It was pretty systematized in like 1930, but then it was the scale in the middle of the century that...
Yeah, so I agree with the scale, like, okay, just to reiterate the scale argument is if the networks, the intellectual networks around physics or around science or around academia, history, whatever it is, those are largely kind of very skill-based. They take promising young guys and they mentor them over the course of many years to sort of become at the top of their field. And there's a lot of these traditions of knowledge in there, some of which are hidden. We don't really know the nature of them, but not hidden as much like secret, just kind of like, it's not all written down,
Right.
It's esoteric knowledge. And that transmission, like you can see this in mathematics, like one of the best ways to win big prizes in mathematics is to be the student of someone who won big prizes in mathematics.
Right, and it's
Likewise,
not nepotism, it's that you just learn the research methods that they can't write down.
Exactly, you learn these traditions of knowledge. And scale disrupts that because, now you have one professor with 5 or 10 or 20. They have to train 20 people, and now you have this is what happened in the middle of the 20th century, and suddenly there's no longer able to maintain those traditions, or if you can maintain the traditions with one of those guys or two of those guys, well, the other 18 now...
They all have the same degree.
They all have the same degree, and
how
no one can tell the difference.
Yeah,
they can't tell the difference among themselves even necessarily.
And so from 1900 to 2000, the per capita proportion of PhDs in the United States of America went up by a factor of 30.
Wow, that's ridiculous.
So like in absolute terms, up by a factor of 100 because the population tripled, but... Like, it is not because we had 30 times more people of the same caliber. It's because in order to
we just hyperinflated the credential.
Yes, and so it just means, a PhD today means probably less than just a bachelor's in the year 1900.
Yeah, I'll go further. A PhD today means less than a good blog.
Yeah, probably. Like, but then the thing with the good blog is... you can't just check, do you have the good blog piece of paper? You have to read the blog.
There's no one stamping that, right? And so like, okay, is this one of the ways... The thing I wanted to say though about institutionalization is that once you have a formal institution that's like stamping out, this guy's got the PhD, right? And that actually became a very centralized system, a very bureaucratized system. It's that part that I'm referring to where it becomes very centralized and bureaucratized. And with the peer review kind of like gate kept on basis other than like citations and just horizontal esteem within the community, it became there's now an institution there, a centralized institution that can be captured by ideologues or just idiots or whatever, and it can decay and become something, a mere social club, right? Or the various ways that these things decay over time. It can be overtaken by the wrong political current or something, which is, I think, like all of these things are kind of what happened to academia in the 20th century. And so, I fear that any kind of systematization now still faces that problem that the the kind of political currents that are dominant now, or the like institutional cultures that are dominant now, are still very much are now very much in this like extractive kind of credential printing, centralized propaganda mode.
And so the version of this, which I would hope to see because of that, is not that there would be some centralized sort of like, good blog certification thing, but like what we've seen so far is much more ad hoc, much more human judgment, much more like, the individual person is not like, oh, I need some sharp San Francisco blogger, but they're like, oh, wait, like, John has been writing about this and seems to really get it, so I'm going to bring in him.
You know what it might be, actually? Like, if we were to scale this thing up in its current sort of institutional forms, like, let's look at Tyler Cowen's
Marginal Ventures.
The Marginal Ventures.
He's done a great job with it.
So what's he doing there? He's basically grabbing these guys, these smart young folks who, they have a certain quality to them, and they're Tyler Cowen coded, so like that has its connotations. But as we've said, there's many scenes in a healthy, or there's many sub scenes in a healthy scene. And so he's putting his stamp of approval, and he gives them, $5,000 to $50,000 or whatever it is.
Right, and he gives them the Tyler Cowen stamp of approval.
The Tyler Cowen stamp of approval. And now there's this credential, right? Which is like, if you go to someone and you say, well, I'm an emergent ventures scholar, or whatever they're called, like, that means something to people who care about that.
Right.
And it means probably a lot more than if you said, like, I'm a Rhodes Scholar to certain people.
Right.
Like, I think some people still care about the prestige of the Rhodes Scholarship, but I don't think anyone pretends that it's like it's not making good use of its human capital. Let's put it that way, or Rhodes's original intentions attached to his capital.
Right, and one of the interesting things is, because it's so personalized, because it is, he doesn't have a bureaucracy filtering these. It's just literally Tyler personally, as the old graybeard, reading them and deciding whether he thinks that he wants to throw his name behind it.
And this is the importance of the individual, right? And the will of the individual is arbitrary, but it's capable of taste.
Yes.
And so, like, the other essential thing you would want is you want more such things, so there can be competition between them. Because, like, if someone comes to me and they say, oh, I've got emergent ventures, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. That doesn't mean anything to me. It might mean something to someone else, or it means a little bit to me, right? But there's other people, like if someone had the, I don't know, who do I respect? The Jack Hughes magazine stamp of approval, right? Like, I take that a lot more seriously.
Right, and like other people would much prefer the GMU stamp, and like that's totally fine.
Yeah, and if Robin Hanson really respects someone, Robin's at GMU, like, okay, I take that more seriously than like Tyler Cowen or his colleague.
Right, but because these are all
Kaplan,
personal endorsements, they end up being much more legible about what specifically it means, rather than just like turning the prestige knob up or down. There's like more content there.
Exactly. It's like a very content rich. And so if you have competition between many tastemakers, like, you can scale it a lot, right? Like, let's say you have just a blog ecosystem. You have room for like 20 different bloggers in your homogeneous blog ecosystem. People can kind of know each other and know who's good, right? And they can respect each other just on the basis of merit. It's like there's room in that kind of ecosystem for maybe 20. I'm just throwing out a number.
Yes, this was the function back in the golden age of blogging that was served by the blog roll. Where you would like link all of your favorite blogs and would sort of, one, help people discover, and two, display a bunch of information about the social graph implicitly.
Yeah, and so, if someone comes to you and they say, oh, I'm this blogger, then you're like, oh, okay, I know who you are, right? I know your thing. But that's not scalable, right? That's like 20 people. And so what this kind of awards or certifications model does is it allows it to scale quite a lot. You can get someone like Tyler Cowen or whatever other institution very specialized in finding people who fit their taste and certifying those. And then from the outside, I only have to know like that a progress studies guy is different from a Lesserang guy, is different from a Palladium guy, right? And like these taste-making institutions become, I only have to know 20 of them, right?
And then
so
and then when the guy shows up and I've got these 2 badges, then maybe you can decide, am I going to
I don't
get
have to know his stuff in particular, but I know he's respected by this thing that I respect, right?
Yeah.
And so you can get a lot more scale that way. So I wonder if just part of the answer is we need to build up a lot more of these kind of award-making, grant-making.
Well, maybe we should start ours. Cowan seems to have been good.
Yeah, I mean, this was one of the ideas behind our conference in January. I was thinking, I was sitting with a friend when we were on the lead up to it. I was thinking, well, we have a lot of guys in our extended online network who have no patronage right now, and we need to find a way to get them prestige and get them money. And but we also weren't very thickly networked either. And so part of the first job is let's get them hooked up personally, right? Get them in the scene so that we can then go to funders or whatever, make the pitch look, we've got all these guys, they're really high quality. If you respect me, let me stamp an award on these guys. And we should just do that maybe without the money as well. I considered it doing that with just my own money. I'll put in $10,000 a year and disperse it, in small amounts. But, and this connects to kind of, Curtis Yarvin complains a lot about the miserly billionaire class, which is a definite subset of the billionaires who talk a lot about the need for this or that, but don't actually fund anything. And one of the ways this should be done is maybe just to shame them, right? It's here we are, these wages, but we're awarding more prestige than you are. Why aren't you getting in on this?
Maybe another thing though is they are very busy people, and maybe we should be giving them clearer signs of who to throw the wads of cash at.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we just have to prove the concept first, right? There's this flywheel effect that has to be done with actually just building out these scenes. But that strikes me as okay. That's one sort of institutional development track that we could go down that would get us, I think, a much stronger intellectual meritocracy in the Western world, and that we could probably make it. I hate to think in terms of scale, but
I'm not persuaded we should, but taking it, for the sake of argument,
let's just say 10 times better along the metric that we care about. I'll, whether that be scale or quality or whatever. I bet there's an order of magnitude in the tank there.
Yes.
So I wonder what other sorts of dimensions of improvement we can go on. A lot of this obviously has to come from the political culture and political change. I think, some of the people in the Trump admin tried to do some things along these lines. I don't think that much was done in terms of improving the meritocracy situation.
It got a few people. It didn't seem like it did anything structural.
Yeah, and then, the Supreme Court has sort of gestured at things here and there. But there's some really... We should have a proper conversation with someone who's a real expert about this someday, but there's a lot that could be done from that angle. It's a lot of this stuff was established or wrecked or changed by the political culture, by the government, to put it more directly, and I think a big dimension of it's going to have to come from that dimension or from that direction as well, but. I don't know. That one's less practical immediately for us. Maybe we should put more thought into it sometime. But I wonder, besides just kind of, we should distribute awards to the guys of merit. What I don't know. What else? What does it look like to kind of improve the intellectual meritocracy situation?
Yeah. So I mean, there's the how do you recognize and sort of how do you make legible to the rest of society that within these cluster these judgments have been made, which I think is an important problem. But there's also just how do you how do you make the thing actually just better at what it's doing? Like, I think that
Yeah,
I think
how do
we
we
have a
improve
lot
it?
of good stuff going on, but like certainly it's got a bunch of pathologies. Certainly it's got
Yeah, we're a bunch of clowns.
yeah, like when it comes to like how do I judge this over like the intellectual scene in Boston? I'm like, yes, I prefer this one. That's why I'm here. And then when I'm like, how does it compare to the size of the challenge? I'm like, oh wow, like we have got our work cut out for us. So then
Yeah,
there's the question
absolutely.
of how do we take the existing thing and make it just better at producing good people and good work?
Yeah, and I mean, how to do this is difficult, but let's name a few of the elements that have improved people intellectually. I'll say, like we were saying, getting torn apart when you post
Yeah.
your stuff and have real debates
Yeah.
with people who actually care about the stuff, and they respond to you in good faith, but without pulling punches.
Yes, I had a lot of very formative experiences when I was, like an adolescent kid. And, the big culture war at the time was atheism versus Christianity. And so I'd just be
Yes.
getting into these arguments online about, is God real? And like, no one knew I was 12 years old, so they just ripped me apart. And that was incredibly good for my, ability to make good arguments.
Right. Yeah, one learns quite a lot about good arguments by spending endless hours on autistic forums where you debate the finer points of whatever video game or operating system or bodybuilding routine or whatever.
Like we should try to do a better job. I think you've actually done quite well with Sophie Chan of building a ground where people are going to tear into each other on the basis of like actual argument.
Well, because to clue people into Sophie Chan a little bit, it's my anonymous, my experiment in anonymous forum building. And basically, you have a reputation with the platform, which is to say spammers are not welcome, but you're anonymous, or you have disposable anonymous identities, which means no one knows who you are. They can guess maybe on your writing style or something, but no one knows who you are. And so I've been able to like totally roast my friends on there, where people will post something and it's like some dumb shit, and it's like, this guy's a friend of mine, and like he's probably gonna get a little bit sensitive if I was criticizing him directly to his face. But we're able to like just go at it and call each other retards on the internet when it's warranted to do so, because we don't know who each other are for sure, right?
Right.
And so, I think it's so, I hesitate to even mention it because it's so minimalistic and so it's not what it should be yet, I think. But I think you're right. There's a version of it that could be really cool. Like imagine Twitter, but like the name fags aren't in charge and you can't be doxxed.
Right. And, there's a bunch of other places that have like, I think for many people, less wrong still ends up being a good place of, like to argue and get torn apart in a way that...
Yeah, less wrong also has a great, healthy intellectual culture. In some ways, I remember I eventually got very frustrated with them, their obtuseness on certain matters of utilitarianism and so on. But we'll put that aside for now.
And, there are many others, but like... would be good for us to, because I think there's many things I like about Twitter, but just the nature of the character limit is that it really isn't one of those places.
Yeah, I mean, I actually appreciate the character limit, but...
it's good for what it's trying to do, but what it's trying to do is not make an argument Thunderdome.
There have been times on Twitter when it was a good argument Thunderdome. The trouble is, I think, the platform has never been committed to good intellectual quality. And, under the old regime, it was, I don't know what you would call it. It was sort of benign neglect mixed with sort of mainstream intellectual prestige and mores. Under the new regime of Elon and Nikita Beer, it's, populist slop, making money from views and clicks and eyeballs, and a lot of the interesting people still just get banned.
We'll have to do a better job of figuring out how we can incubate, the real Thunderdome.
I think a lot of it is the platform has to actually care. there's I've looked into this because I built one with Sophie Chan. I put a lot of thought into it about like what went wrong with Reddit, what went wrong with 4chan, what went wrong with Twitter, what went wrong even on like Less Wrong, and like if the platform cares, that overcomes a lot. There's certain things you can do, I think, to kind of allow, certain things the platform can do if it cares to do so, to protect certain kinds of intellectual diversity from the parochial tastes of the administrators. But you have to be sort of capable of that kind of meta level reflection that like, I actually do want to encourage free speech from people I disagree with and stuff like this.
Very few people actually want that, but the ones who do, you can go quite far.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the platform has to care is the important thing there. And I think we have built very few platforms that are like natively attempting to be like a high-powered intellectual Thunderdome.
Yeah, and my suspicion is that it will never be one of the big mainstream ones that like,
no, of course not.
My cousin is on. I think they're all going to be fairly small niches with like, at most 20,000 people at like the very biggest.
Yeah, and maybe even bigger. I mean, German academia at its height, which is really the height of the intellectual culture of the West, it's like what, 1 in 1,000 people are even like involved in this thing. It's a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not like that. What is it? Half of Americans go to college today, which is a ridiculous overexpansion of the program. Which isn't to say you shouldn't go to college. I think the credential is unfortunately very important still, but
yeah,
I think the colleges should be shut down and pared down to what they used to be, or what they should be in the future, by some logic.
Yeah, like the question of how should you navigate given the system is a very different question from does the system actually serve the needs of society?
Yeah, exactly. Like you should get your degree, but also the college system should be destroyed.
Yes.
But yeah, but I think okay, we could build better online infrastructure for like the intellectual Thunderdome style debate. I think another one underrated is the in-person book club.
Yes, I've gotten a ton out of these.
Extremely powerful. If you get together, half a dozen people of like mind on some dimensions, you read books together, you have your discussions together, it just absolutely forms people's worldviews. It makes people much stronger in their understanding of the world, and also has all these auxiliary benefits in terms of like these people are going to be your intellectual comrades for life.
Yeah, and if you look at the various vanguard parties within our current system, basically all of them are like cliques of people who did a lot of intense reading together.
You say within our current system. This is historically true as well, obviously. Like, I think, the early Communist Party famously doing a lot of reading.
Like, Lenin systematized the book club more than I think anybody else as a political tool.
Yeah, the fascists, for example, like I think Mussolini was some kind of dissident socialist from some book club that went wrong.
Really? Like, that makes sense.
It's like, there's all kinds of, went wrong, according to the other socialists. There's all kinds of power historically, or like, even our modern economics and so on. It's like, it comes out these effectively little intellectual networks that are reading books together. So very powerful book clubs. Book clubs are very powerful. We should do a lot more of that in this city. I think we do a little bit of it.
Yeah.
But it's, part of the issue there is everyone's so busy, right? And it's like to get everyone coordinated around reading a particular book at a particular time and like coming out, you have to relax something. It's people don't necessarily have the
well, this is because you're trying to get a bunch of 35-year-olds who are in the middle of their careers and
we need more NEETs. We need more NEETs.
Yes.
The NEETs are the future ruling class for sure.
Yeah, and for those of you who are 22 years old and are still have the time to be exploring and checking out things, I think that putting together a book club with some of your sharpest friends is a very good investment.
Yeah, speaking of which, we should polish up our reading list and publish it.
Oh yes, that'll be fun.
We did a good one back with Palladium. We launched a network of book clubs under Palladium. This was near the end. It was in 2023, near the end of my tenure. Some of them are still going very successfully. So, but yeah, we put a lot of thought into like, okay, suppose we want to like yank some young Palladium reader out of their preconceptions and give them an actual grounding in the things we think are important. Here's the like 20 books, that they should read, and they had a lot of fun with that. It was good. But we should do that again. Yeah, I mean, the problem of how to create and maintain meritocratic intellectual culture is, I mean, in many ways, it's like very close to what we're just trying to do with this project with the students. It's called the students for a reason, right? We are trying to create a culture among ourselves of actually doing the reading, actually doing the thinking, actually doing the argument, having the arguments, frankly and unapologetically.
Yeah, there's no way around it.
There's no way around it, and yeah, I mean, this is a very fruitful line of inquiry. I think we've been going for a while now. We could roll it up, but it's a good topic, and we should hit it again at some point.
For sure. Well, it's a pleasure as always.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Ben, for coming on and discussing this with me, and I guess we'll see you next time.